Good evening, my name is Jamila Espinosa, and on behalf of the Pomona Student Union, I would like to welcome you to What You Didn't Learn, discussing the socialization of minority students at Pomona College. Joining me as a co-facilitator tonight is Eric. Eric, introduce yourself.
Hey guys, thank you guys for coming. You guys all look so lively. Excited to have you guys here. My name is Eric Velasquez. I'm a sophomore here at Pomona. Represent. And as Jamila said, we're hosting socialization of minority students here at Pomona College. I'm really excited to have this topic and to be talking about this kind of stuff. So, yeah.
Just a little background. Pomona Student Union is a nonpartisan student-run organization. It looks to spark honest dialogue, challenge assumptions, by presenting a multiplicity of perspectives through speeches, discussions, and debates on important issues such as this one. So at Pomona College, different perspectives, experiences, and backgrounds contribute to a wide diversity of knowledge. However, not all social and cultural knowledge is incorporated equally into the Pomona College community, whether that be academic or social. And tonight we hope to kind of discuss why that is and why that holds true.
So thank you for joining us again. Tonight we have Professor Summer Sandoval, Professor Mays, Professor Tai, and Karen Sisson, Treasurer of Pomona College. I'm going to introduce Professor Summer Sandoval and Professor Mays. Professor Summer Sandoval is a father, a husband, a brother, a son, and a teacher. He's the second of 3 children born from 2 Chicanos from the East Los Angeles and the grandson of Mexican immigrants who arrived to California in the early and mid-20th century. Professor Summer Sandoval received his bachelor's from Claremont McKenna College. He then studied at the University of California, Berkeley, where he received his master's degree and PhD. He joined the Intercollegiate Department of Chicano Latino Studies here at Pomona in January 2006, where he teaches classes primarily focused on Latino and Latina history. He is also a faculty coordinator for the Draper Center. Professor April Mays has been, Professor April Mays has been with Pomona College History Department since 2006, and her area of focus includes colonial and modern Caribbean history. She received her bachelor's from Pomona College and her PhD from University of Michigan. In her new book, The Mulatto Republic, Professor Mays discusses the roots of anti-Haitian and the Dominican elite, and the ways in which race and nation have been intertwined in the history of the Dominican Republic. Let's give a welcoming hand to Professor Mays.
So, my turn. Professor Tai has been a part of Pomona College's Sociology Department since 2001. His areas of expertise include immigration and the Vietnamese diaspora. He received his BA and master's, he received his BA from the University of Florida and his master's and PhD from UC Berkeley. His new book, Insufficient Funds, Money Flow and Low-Wage Transnational Families, tells the story of how low-wage Vietnamese immigrants in the U.S. and their poor non-migrant family members give, receive, and spend money. As Pomona's Vice President and Treasurer, Karen Sisson is the college's Chief Financial and Investment Officer. She's responsible for managing an annual operating budget of more than $145 million and our endowment. She's also responsible for supervising the business office, human resources, campus planning and construction, and property management. She received her BA from Pomona College and her master's from the University of Chicago.
So through this discussion, our speakers will explain how structures of power lead to socialization, manipulation of identity, and even negation of a self for students who are in the socioeconomic and cultural minority. Let us give a welcoming hand to the panelists again. The event will take place, so it's going to be 3 questions of 3 minutes each question, and then we will proceed on to the next question. And afterwards, we will open up the ground for you guys to ask questions. We really want this to be an interactive process, and so we encourage you guys to ask, come up with questions while the panelists are thinking, while the panelists are speaking, and really nail them, you know. So, yeah.
Okay, so Eric's gonna ask the first question, but just in terms of a little background. It's about socialization, and we thought it'd be helpful to kind of define that. So as scholars, Conchas, and Hugh define it, socialization is the process by which a person learns the behaviors and norms of a given social group and is molded into an effective participant. So that's for Eric.
Right, so the first question is, in what ways have institutions of higher education socialized your identity and understanding of knowledge, and what is appropriate knowledge? So we will open up the ground with Professor Samar Sandoval, and we will proceed. That way.
I'm not going to ask a question like that. I'm not a sociologist. Go first.
I don't think that's a very good excuse, but okay. First of all, I'd like to say thank you to Jamila and Eric for organizing this, and for all of you for coming. I think this is such an important event, and I hope that it's one of many events that you will gather together to kind of talk about the topics, which is so important and is really under-discussed at the Claremont colleges, and in particular at Pomona College. So I really support this. I first want to start by thinking about this question. I was wondering, I was thinking when the questions were posed to me, when I was reading them, they were sent to us ahead of time, and we were still trying to figure out what they wanted us to say when we sat down. And I think for me, part of this confusion about these questions is I think because the organizers really try to stick with the ways in which the institution speak, right? And I think that it's trying to get at, for me at least, how do we kind of contextualize the ways in which we consume knowledge as students, as teachers, as academics. And I think that my own personal background is such that many of you have taken my class. I see many of my former students and current students, is that institutions have a very systematic way of socializing students and even workers, such as professors, administrators at the school. They have a very different interest. And within institutions, it's the people who sort of make the socialization process. In my experience, I think that I grew up in a very low-income family from Mississippi. And when I went to graduate school, much more in graduate school than undergrad, I went to the University of Florida for undergrad. And when I went to the University, UC Berkeley, even though it's a public school, it's graduate school, it's highly comprised of very upper middle class individuals because it's, as you know, a very highly ranked university, at least for the graduate programs. And so what happens, what happened with my introduction to graduate school was that for the first time in my life, I experienced this distance from my family in a way that is reflected in this memoir that some of you may have read by Richard Rodriguez called Hunger of Memory, where he talks about how schooling can really devastate a working class person by actively distancing themselves, particularly people who go to spaces of elitism and elite aspirations, and how this plays a tremendous role in distancing ourselves from our family of origin and our community of origin. And for me, I really have struggled up until, even till today, struggle with that distance and how I have to negotiate with how to think about what that has done. I think one of the examples of this is when you are at an elite place, you often think that the ways in which you get socialized, the ways in which you gain particular mannerisms, are in fact ways that you can experience mobility, particularly for those of us who have these mobility aspirations, which is why we go to elite places in the first place, because we know that this brings us a particular kind of cachet. But we often forget to become very critical of how it is part of the institutionalized phenomenon of disengaging us from our community of origin. I'll turn this to the next person.
I think one of the important caveats for me to make is I experienced Pomona 35 years ago. This is actually going to be my 35th reunion this year. So Pomona was not elite at that point. It was a very strong, highly ranked regional school. But I experienced some similar things. So I came from a very low income family, basically a single mother. I grew up in Baldwin Park. I guess there's some people went to Baldwin Park High School. And so when I got to Pomona, it was not so much disconnection from family, although there are cultural roots in my family that I become disconnected from because my parents divorced at an early age. My father is Hispanic. It was the fact that I wasn't as prepared. The kids that came from prep schools and really highly rated public schools, and I got here and I struggled. And I struggled not just academically, but I struggled socially because, I hate to admit this, but there's no one in my sponsor group I still know. I was just very different from the group I was in. And I think, the institution, for my case, again, upward mobility was an issue with my family, being very low income, and my mother trying to support her parents who were, my grandmother was a garment worker, and my grandfather worked in a meatpacking family, so resources were tight, and it was about being able to get to a point after Pomona where I could support myself, and I could help with those things. And so all of that was about how do you navigate the system, right? How do you come in as one person and sort of exit in a way where you can have that sort of mobility, and in my case, I wasn't going to graduate school right away, so competing for a job with other people that had different backgrounds and had different access. The job I got, I didn't even know existed except that I had a friend in my major who came from the East Coast, from a very well-established family on the East Coast, who knew about these management training programs and kind of gave me the form, and I wouldn't have even known about that. So it was about coming to Pomona and learning what I could, learning all I could, making use of the institution and its resources to be able to get to a place I wanted to get to when I got out. And I really wasn't very focused on who I was or what my background was or anything like that. It was really about where could I get and what did I have to do to get there. I don't mean to imply that I compromise my sense of personal values, but there were certain hurdles that were different for me than they were for many of my classmates. But I have to say this in concluding my remarks. Pomona for me was transformational, and the institution was not really the hurdle. It was a different area. The hurdles were mine, because I actually found great support here when I reached out and talked to people about those hurdles. And again, that was 35 years ago. I don't know if it's that way now, but it really was a very, very good transition for me.
Okay, so, and please excuse me, I have this cough that I got from Juan, for those of you in my class. Remember Juan Valdez came, he had a cold. Very upset with him right now. I also want to say congratulations to my sponsors. I see some of you in the audience, some of you my babies, so I look forward to your work next year, or this fall. So building off a little bit of what both Honey and Karen have said, and I think I've shared this with students too. When I came to Pomona, by the time I came to Pomona then, right, Pomona had become an elite national institution, and thank you for pointing that out, because I think that we, in this period, and even in my period, think that Pomona had always been that way, but the Pomona that I experienced, the Pomona that you're experiencing in this district of CMC, I think, for all of these colleges they've undergone very significant changes, since the 1980s into the 90s. And so it is important to mark there is a historical context in which our experiences take shape, right? And what I say about my own experience here at the college, when I came, I felt like I was always the loudest person in the room. Some of you feel that way? Oh, right. Okay. I got in trouble for this a couple years ago. But yes, and that was all about the, and when I'm looking back on it now, I realize I was very attuned to picking up the cues and the clues about how I needed to act differently a little bit. So being loud, right? I can now consider myself loud. I was never loud before until I came here. And for me then, Claremont was just this really quiet place. And I thought that that's what it meant then to be an academic, an intellectual, to be at college, was somehow you got really quiet. And for those of you who know me or live above me, it's, that that's not true anymore. I tell my students stories like, when I came here, I came from, I guess, low income, but both of my parents worked. My stepdad was a bus driver. My mother was a nurse. So the income was, steady, and, they were able to send me to private schools during, my pre-college life. So yes, if paycheck to paycheck makes you low income, yes, I guess we were low income as well. But I discovered Brie and Birkenstocks. Is also a way that I summarize my experience coming to the college, right? And that too is about socialization and socializing into a particular, class norm, right? Particular style. Again, I thought that wearing the Birkenstocks and, eating the Brie, these were all sort of things that all white people did. And then I found out that wasn't the case either. There were some class distinctions among them too, right? That it was a certain kind of affluent, white culture, whiteness that was also being displayed. And so I'll stop there and then I'll catch up in a second. Hummus, yeah.
So I'll be very blunt about how I chose Terminal McKenna. So I chose it because I saw it as very white and very upper class. So I came here with the intent of having whatever the commodity was that was sold there, right? Thinking that if it was good enough for who seemed very, hyper anglicized people and people of wealth, that it was important for me to have that kind of commodity. So I think that colleges largely, very few of us choose it for assimilative purposes. But I think that's the dominating role that college tries to play, and often does. I think I came into it with a very intentional sense that that was what was at play. So I think what that bred in me was this kind of hyper defense mechanism at the same time. I came in and I was constantly sort of challenged in who I was and how I felt about that decision initially. That created a sort of very defensive kind of, young man that I was. A very angry one a lot of the times. One who had to sort of feel and sort of posture that what I knew and what my people knew and what my community knew and my entire sort of subjective reality was more authentic than everyone else, or was more true. And so those kinds of dynamics were very important to how I created this sort of coping mechanism. I think in the long-term effect, though, I think that I came around. I think the anger sort of tempered itself a little bit. It really didn't go all the way away until about 10 years ago. But yeah, it's kind of gone now. I'm gonna go to my alumni. But I think what that did is it always kept me kind of in this weird kind of simultaneity of really, I mean, embracing a lot of the kinds of experiences that I could have here, a lot of the educational experiences, a lot of the preparatory experiences, a lot of the experience of being able to navigate this kind of social world, being able to navigate that social world inside the classroom, do all those kinds of things. But at the same time, gave me this kind of balance where I constantly didn't fool myself into thinking that that was all there was, or that this was the only form of knowledge or the only form of truth. And that kind of dynamic, which was difficult to have to contain in my own life experience, I think was a huge advantage for me later on.
Okay, so the second question is, how does your experience translate into navigating spaces outside of Pomona College or higher education in general? Please reflect on the way that your socialization relates to how your identity changed the way you were viewed and how you viewed spaces back home.
I was just thinking about what Tomas just said about his experience of coming to the Claremont Pomona College as sort of this angry person. I think I had the opposite experience. I came to college having only been in the United States for 10 years as a refugee from Vietnam, and growing up, having grown up in the housing projects in Mississippi. So I bought into the whole assimilation paradigm of US culture. So I really strove really hard to fit into mainstream culture. So at the University of Florida, which is predominantly white, I never challenged the institution, so I always wanted to fit in. And I think I did that until, I think very recently, probably until I got tenure at Pomona College. because I, even though I teach about these things, I've been teaching about these things for a long time, I really never had, well, all the graduates would, because I think the innocence really traveled with me for a long time. And a story about how I was so innocent and dumb is that when I applied for jobs as a professor, I was in the field, I was in Vietnam, doing research, which is where my research is based, and I was finishing my PhD, and I told my PhD advisor, oh, I'm going to get on the job market, please email me all the positions you see, which is something you never do. You don't tell your advisor to email you the positions that are available. You got to do the research yourself. So then I just applied for all kinds of jobs, from community colleges to Ivy Leagues, and I interviewed at the whole range. So when I applied to Pomona College, I had never heard of liberal arts colleges. I thought I was applying to a community college. So when they called me for an interview, I was actually in Vietnam, and I didn't have time to do the research. So I knew that I was going on 16 interviews for jobs. So when I landed at Pomona, I said, oh my God, this is a nice community college. and then at that moment, I realized I need to find out about how people do things. And I think this is where my pivotal moment, if you will, of trying to really having to learn the system, because that innocence that I had for so long really was a disadvantage. And so I tell my students now to be informed about the institution and be informed about the processes of how you get from one place to another. And I have a lot more to say, but I think I'm running out of time, so I'll save it.
So I'm listening to Professor Sandoval and Professor Tai, and I think, so I came to Pomona frankly because it was the cheapest place for me to come. It was really, I didn't know, it was very good. It wasn't elite, it was very good. I didn't know good from bad, I just know it was cheap, right? Because, where I went to high school at that time, anyone who's from Ballpark High School, who knew what Harvard was or Stanford or any of that? Nobody did, right? And so it was cheap. And it meant that my mom didn't have to pay for it. And but I was the opposite. I was really quiet, which no one would believe now given my job and you get emails from me, but I was very quiet. I was always studying, I was always in the library, I was always having this drive to achieve, to be successful, to make the investment that my mother had in me as a single mom pay off. I was very motivated by wanting to make her proud and make my extended family proud and to be successful. And for me, somewhat like Professor Tai, So I have this Hispanic heritage, and I like never checked the box ever that I was Hispanic because I didn't grow up around that side of my family. And it's only been very recently, actually through knowledge, I'm actually in graduate school right now, and that I have become aware of some of the things I'm still carrying around about that, and about why was I not able to acknowledge that, and how has that impacted some of the choices I've made in my life, and also just even how I view sort of what's going on in America now. I find myself looking at things very differently as I've become more familiar with my own personal family history that was sort of hidden from me for a long time. And I think one of the great things about institutions, the institutions are what they make them. I kind of want to second what Professor Tai said. You can either look at the institution as oppressive and trying to make you fit through the chute and make you go through the hurdles. Or you can look at the institution like you would a video game, and you can get really good at it. And you can learn how it works, and you can use it to your advantage. And I, in my career, now 25 years, I've always done the latter. I've been a real student. Unlike you, I didn't take the innocence with me. I have been a student of every institution that I've been affiliated with, and I have learned how it works, and who I need to talk to, and what are the formal structures, and what are the informal structures. And so I also encourage you as you're going through, whether it's your education or your work experience, to really do that, because it really pays off being able to do that.
I have to agree, and with the word that I wrote down in thinking about this question is a roadmap. Every institution has its culture, and they all have roadmaps. Like the video game is also a nice metaphor for that, right? And you kind of draw your journey from one level to the next, to the next, to the next. And this is difficult, but that's what mentors are for. And your mentor, your advisor, older, upper class people, those are the folks who can help you navigate the ins and outs of an institution and provide you that roadmap. And that's what I had, or that's what I gained by having some great advisors when I came to the college. In terms of the question of identity and socialization, yeah, I did experience that distancing, the sort of, the sense of sort of becoming a new odd creature. But I didn't approach the institution neither with innocence, and nor probably I didn't develop a hyper defensiveness necessarily, because I took a lot of that energy in other projects. So, for example, I journaled a lot, and that's sort of the best therapy. And then I became involved. Right, I found myself writing for the Student Life. If you looked in the archives, you could find some of my pieces. Writing for the Review, writing for Harmony, which is a multicultural newspaper. You remember Harmony? Multicultural newspaper. Acting, just sort of being in the life in ways that made me comfortable. But at the same time, that I was changing in so many ways. I was also kind of reaching back into kind of the roots of myself and getting those lessons that my parents had always taught me, right? So somehow a lot of that came back and gave me strength. So for example, we had critical conversations about race in my household. We just did. My parents made me understand clearly that I was growing up in a racist society, that racism existed, that it was a problem, and that what they were doing in part was to help me get a better footing so that I could move, in this narrative of progress, et cetera, and that I had a responsibility to them for that, right? I also grew up in a world that was very collective. So I also grew up in a family where I never bought vegetables in a store. So that was really odd to me, to have to buy vegetables in a store, because my mother had a garden. But what that also enabled was a lot of sharing. So she would share all of her produce with people at the job, with our neighbors. And that sharing and that collectivity and that notion of reciprocity, all of that came back to me too as resources, these were sort of my cultural, familial resources that helped me also navigate the college that I wasn't necessarily so clear about coming to the institution, but they were precisely those things that I drew upon, you know, as I was trying to figure out how to navigate the institution.
On the other part of that question about where you go, how you feel about other spaces and things like that, I feel that Claremont College is sort of demystifying the wider society, a more upper class society as well. In my first couple of weeks at Berkeley, I was in seminars, and I felt very comfortable there. I felt very capable there. I had students who were part of my grad program. It was the first time that they ever had a class that small. There was 14 people in that class. I had a whole bunch of classes that were smaller than that. So I felt very sort of competent in that social world. Around like the chancellor, like I got involved in student government, the board of trustees, everything like that. I was never really ever in an environment again where I felt out of place, where I felt like I didn't know how to negotiate that social world. So I felt that it made me sort of very culturally competent in a lot of ways. The word that I like to think about is transculturation, which is this word from Antonio Busiaga, who is a Chicano writer. But he talks about the same kind of thing that Gloria Anzaldúa does, sort of being this kind of character who can be on the borderlands, right, of the both, navigating both sides of that kind of world. And I thought that I had those kinds of skills after the year. Inside of that family dynamic, though, it was a lot more difficult, I think, for me. And I don't think it was my family who was creating that dynamic. I think it was all about me. Right? It was all inside of my head. But you have this kind of like shame, sort of guilt about getting, at least I had this kind of shame and guilt about having my education. My immediate family, my nuclear family, all went to college sort of together. When I started Claremont McKenna, my mom was in community college already. So I grew up in a house where nobody had college degrees, but now like everybody has a BA, and my mom has a master's, my two sisters have a master's. My older sister, she's a professor of Chicano studies at Northridge. So now we're like all hybrid. So the internal nuclear family, we sort of did this together. So education was this very collective effort, learning about it. Each one of us had a different experience, but it was all part of the collective knowledge. Inside of the larger family, we ended up with a very large family. And I think this multi-generational kind of dynamic is very characteristic of large Latino families that are multi-generational. You have often a whole class spectrum inside of your family. But my sister was very educated inside that context. And you're often, I felt very much like I had to make sure that people didn't think that I thought I was better than everybody else because I had an education. Recognizing also at the same time that anybody in my family could have had the same experience if things had just totally shifted, in sometimes small ways and sometimes large ways. And you sort of have to work through all those kinds of dynamics. At least I had to work through those kinds of dynamics.
Thank you so much. Those were great answers. Sorry, quite shocked. So the third and final question is, in what ways can institutions like Pomona College reaffirm intellectual/cultural capital brought by students who are not in the socioeconomic and cultural majority?
I think this is a great question. First of all, there's a number of ways to answer this question. But first, let me just say that I don't take institutions very seriously. And what I mean by that is that I think many people think institutions are somehow embodied by someone, like somebody sits somewhere and that's the institution, and they make decisions about something or the things that we care about and how we govern the place where we are. But in fact, it's the decisions that are made by people as a collective that in the end make what we call the institution. So I think the word institution is quite a misnomer, and I sort of want to put that out. But I think this question gets at, for me, this idea that sociologists call contradictory class mobility, which many of us, I'm sure many of you experience, and that is when we are from a particular class origin entering a space normally upward mobility, although it can occur downwardly as well. When we move upwardly, we hold on to a particular identity that is oftentimes inconsistent with our origin, our class origin. And for me, this is particularly important because I come from a family of 5 siblings. I'm the fifth. I'm the middle child, but there are 5 of us, and none of my siblings went to college, and none of them have ever been on a plane, so they haven't flown. And as many of you know, some of my students here know, I fly all the time. I just got back from Poland last night, for example. So for me, this is something that I have to tackle with in my life, and this is something that many of us have to kind of think about. And it's related to this idea of how we think about our place as cultural and class minorities, because I think that Pomona College is not going to do much for you if you're not going to do it for yourself. Right? I mean, it is the organization of students, or the organizing of students, the collective action of students, who understand that in order for things to take place, that these are the first steps that happen for us to feel included and to develop mechanisms of inclusion for us in this space. And I think it's extremely important also to think that I believe that even though we're not at sort of the place that I want to be, that we have enough collective action at the faculty level and staff level now where students have a core group of faculty who they can turn to address issues of inclusion on many levels, not just class and race, but sexuality, religion, etc., gender, that students really need to understand that they can turn to and ask or even demand that particular interests are addressed for them. So for example, I offer this class called the Second Generation Immigrant Experience, which is a class that I started offering because my students came to me and said they wanted to understand what is it like growing up as a working class immigrant person. So in this class, which I'm teaching now, and some of my students are in the audience, we deal with how people who grow up in a poor immigrant family struggle to interface with public institutions like schooling, like work, like the public sphere. And this is how you get to think about these issues. You demand it, you organize, and you form a collective action around it.
So I think what I would say about this particular topic is that I really agree with Professor Tai that institutions are people. In some of the issues that the college has dealt with over the last 5 years, I've often had people say, it's not about you or this person, it's about the college. And I'm like, kind of say back to them, well, who do you think the college is anyway? It's all of us. But I do think that there are these mechanisms in place, whether they're with faculty or with staff, with student groups, to deal with inclusivity, to deal with different experiences. I guess I come from a little different perspective in that I think sometimes we're working so hard at being inclusive that we're exclusive. So we're working so hard to be everything to everybody that sometimes, I see from sitting in Alexander, so I was talking to the panelists today that it was really fun for me to be able to actually interact with students. But it also gives me some distance, and sometimes I see a lot of groupthink. And there's some groupthink that goes on our campus. And I think part of what the institution needs to do is to make sure that all those voices are heard. All the voices. Whether it's voices of immigrants, whether it's voices of those of us who may have come from socioeconomic backgrounds that are not, where we don't feel like we fit in with the country club set or, the elite or whatever it is. Or, those that just have a very different experience. Maybe not socioeconomic hurdles, maybe not ethnic or experiential hurdles, but other kinds of hurdles. And this is something that was really personal for me when I came to Pomona, because one of my closest friends, probably the only person I'm still in touch with in Pomona, actually came from that very elite part of society. Father came over or ancestors came over on the Mayflower and all this. And so her father was a very high-ranking government official and, was an assistant undersecretary of state at one point. And one of the great breakthroughs for me was to to find out that she had some of the anxiety I had. Why? Because she had not been accepted at Pomona as a freshman. She went to Pitzer and then she transferred. And so she had all this anxiety and intimidation of the fact that she had not been accepted when she first applied. And so I had this anxiety about not fitting in because I didn't get the, sort of prep school and highly prepared and coming with all the contacts and knowing who you were going to. She was coming from the other thing where she was totally intimidated because, yeah, but you got in. And so that was kind of it's not a big thing, but it was something that stuck with me that I have to look at my experience. I can't judge. I have to look at everyone's experience uniquely, and I have to allow for them to experience things the way they experience it. So I can't sort of push my my thoughts about hurdles and what people are overcoming just based on my own experience.
Yeah, I go back and forth because on the one hand, and maybe it's the cynic in me or maybe it's the experience in me, but also having just recently read some student writing about the ways in which race structured their educational experiences prior to getting to college, in addition to what happened to them at college. I'm not sure institutions as such can do much. We end up surviving them more often than them nurturing and us and cultivating us and maybe the other ways that we want to be cultivated and nurtured, but certainly preparing us to do other stuff, right? And it's sort of figuring out what the job of an institution or the collective that makes the institution, what are they here for? That became real to me in graduate school when I realized that the first part of deciding to go to graduate school was to go to graduate school, but then what was happening to me was that I was being trained to be a professional historian. I didn't realize that that's what graduate school was going to do to me, right? And so, but that's what that institution at that level is supposed to do. Now, where I find affirmation of my intellectual, cultural capital that I brought to that institution, it's not going to come from the graduate school because the graduate school is not about affirming those things in me. It's about training me to be a professional historian, which has another kind of intellectual, cultural capital baggage, right? So then I had to turn to other means of getting that affirmation. And again, I go back to mentoring, finding my mentors, finding, and then doing new things. I took a swimming class, I took dance, I did sort of things to get out of my head, made sure I went to Michigan, as you said, and it's cold. Made sure I got out of Michigan a couple of times of the year, right, during the cold. But then at the same time, I also hold institutions responsible for what they do to us. And I don't think that I'm not really ready to let that go. So, for example, and I guess it's not absolutely private. So we will be reviewing the general education as a faculty next year. I don't know if it's going to finish in 1 year. I don't know if it's going to finish in 2 years. I don't know if it'll finish in 5 years, because that's how institutions work, because people are really slow. But we're going to start having conversations about what is the education we feel and that you're going to tell us prepares you. And what does a liberal arts education look like in the 21st century, right? And again, is the question, is that going to reaffirm something about your identity? Probably not. It's not stated. We're looking at the general ed requirements and we're going to review them. But if you work collectively to get your voices heard around key issues like DDP and other things, that will do that. Are you hearing me? So again, is that the institution driving it? Or is that you collectively responding, participating, investing your time, investing your energy, getting your voices heard in the process? That is doing the reaffirming. Okay.
I think we have a really healthy sense about our privilege in being here, right? That's part of the Pomona culture, I think, in a lot of ways. So we understand a lot of, in so many different ways, how what we experience here is not the real world. And we talk about this bubble that we're always challenging, and you know, the food, the cleanliness, the yards, everything. How and it is. But also, I think so. Part of how I see our obligation and our responsibility is to also understand how we're very much a part of it. Right? It's not an accident that the majority of people who do service work in the colleges speak Spanish as their first language, and the majority of people who do the intellectual work in the colleges do not. And that's not an accident. Right? So in many ways, we are very much the outside world, and we recreate that outside world. We're a sample of that outside world. So I think that's the first step, is to understand what we are, what we aren't. And I see that as a wonderful opportunity. I see that as all good things, even when you're reproducing those kinds of racialized gender hierarchies. Because you have an opportunity to change them, to think about them differently. So when we say what's our responsibility as an institution, I echo what Hung Tai said. I mean, I don't think about it as the institution. I think about what's my responsibility, right? What's your responsibility? And I'm not going to sit here and tell you what yours is. You can do that after if you want. I know very much what mine is. And that's very much a part of my own commitment to Chicano Latino studies and to ethnic studies. And I want a more functional, multiracial democracy, a more equitable, multiracial democracy. I want my children to grow up in a world that is much better at doing what this country has committed itself to and says that it does. So that's what I do in my classes. I try to prepare people to be the people who are going to make that happen with me. That's not I hopefully, too, not very academic, because it's very much the commitment of what my fields of study have been. But that's how I see my responsibility inside of a place like Pomona. And I also hope that it opens up opportunities for others and students, faculty, and us as a larger community about thinking about what are other responsibilities that an institution like this, an elite institution like this, that a wealthy institution like this, inside of this day and age where higher education is marked by a greater amount of inequity than it was for a previous generation, what is our collective responsibility as an institution? What is the thing that we have to commit ourselves to for the future as well?
Thank you. Thank you. So now we're just going to open it up to general questions. Eric, do you want to do that?
We have a mic on the side, right here, over there. We would also like to take the time now to thank the panelists for coming out here. If you guys have any questions?
Go, Cameron. Go, Cameron.
Whoa. Is that working? Uh-oh. Whoa. I'm wondering if you could speak about what you see to be the specific sites of socialization here at Pomona College specific to this institution. For example, orientation or ID1 classes, or what specific to this institution do you see to be the socializing courses, and how can we address those as students or on a higher level?
Yeah, what is it?
What?
I mean, I think it all is, right? I mean, my most memorable one, or more lasting one from my experience here, I shouldn't say that it's like your experience, but it was just the student social environment. It's the more dominating one. Hardest one to negotiate.
Okay, so I'm going to date myself because when I was here, there were frats. And there was no Smith Campus Center. the student life really was. I mean, that was really difficult to navigate because, I don't know if I should admit this, but I never made it off of South Campus in 4 years. And the social life was all on North Campus, so it was very much a bifurcated campus when I was here. And it was kind of the way I experienced it was that all the in people and all the in fun stuff was happening on North Campus. And all the people that weren't really cool and really didn't have anything to do socially lived on South Campus. And we were doing things like going to get donuts in Glendora and watching the midnight movie at the School of Theology, and everyone else had these tickets to get into the frown parties, and if you didn't have a ticket, you couldn't get in. So there was very much this but you had to know someone in one of the frats. And of course, sometimes for a certain price, you could get them, but if your resources were limited, you may not have the right price. So I really, the social environment of the college was very different than for one thing, but it also was very, that was another place where you really felt, I would say not so much ethnic and racial distinction as economic distinction. It was more economic. But that was really part of college. Interestingly, though, I think some of the faculty are still here that I had, believe it or not. But I think that the classes I had, however, there was a real effort. This was back in the day, okay, so it was before a lot of these issues were really discussed openly. The faculty at the time were very sensitive, particularly to class and race issues, and there was real effort in the classroom to tear down those kinds of distinctions and to really validate different people's experience. Whether it was at the college, again, I really want to emphasize what April said because I had 3 really great mentors at Pomona. Whether it was through mentors or through professors, just in terms of how they taught the curriculum, which is not quite as interactive as you're experiencing it now, but still very much, all of the professors I had were very invested in their students, and they wanted to make sure every voice was heard. And so that was a place where you did get affirmation, regardless of who you were. But I agree, the student culture was really hard.
I think kind of comparing my experiences with what I hear from students, that, and Cameron, to take your question very seriously, I think everywhere is a site of socialization into these particular norms. I think your dorm hallway, right, is the first and probably most intense site where a lot of that takes place from the first instance. What I worry about is, are there enough sites of affirmation happening and being cultivated, right? We have certain safe space. We have, we would like to consider the entire campus, I think, a safe space generally. But I know that some of you consider some spaces safer than others. And so that's where you go and you socialize. But it's not even just about the physical location of space. It's sort of how and what venues are your voices coming out. And that's why I sort of mentioned, the writing that I was doing, or that I did as a student, as kind of anachronistic almost as newspaper sound. It's very important. That's an important venue for reshaping space, right? How, if every site is a site of socialization in some way, right? The question then becomes, well, where do I enter and what can I add to it, change it, challenge it? And there are multiple ways of doing that. And so and it's not, and I'm not saying because you are a very different generation from our generations. And so part of your challenge as your generation is the way technology has shaped your lives. I think you said this at one point that with the first year class this year was a class that never not used the internet. Right? Maybe, again, I might have been dreaming that. Right, everybody is sad. But that's not true for my generation, right? But this is your generation. So how you shape space is even conceived of very differently. How you respond, you're blogging, you're doing this, you're doing that. But are those techniques reaching down where you want them to, and those strategies, are they coming back down and doing the work that you needed to do for the everyday, your everyday struggles. Does that make sense? So that's what I worry about. Sort of where the interfacing is happening so that you do get that affirmation.
I was trying to think about a tangible way of thinking about spaces of socialization, and I think that I don't know what my students do, and I don't really want to know everything about what they do. So that's sort of a separate thing, I think. I couldn't answer the question of what my students do in their leisure and private spaces that get them socializing to whatever it is that they socializing to. But what I, as a faculty member, am concerned and am very committed to is thinking about how my students, students who take my classes, students who encounter me in informal spaces like this, get to think about issues I care about, particularly for students who, the topic here, who are part of cultural and socioeconomic minorities, who need to seek out particular faculty who can talk the way they talk without having coded language, for example. And I think one of the things that I find, for me, very disturbing sometimes is when I see students who really struggle to find a faculty member who they can talk in their language. And I think that students here should always remember that there are faculty. And I think there is now enough. We could always use more, but I think now there is enough faculty members at Pomona College who can speak the language of cultural and socioeconomic minority students, who are very much willing to speak to them in whatever topics that they want to talk about. And in my own responsibility, I take it upon myself to identify students who take my classes, who I encounter in informal spaces when they want to have those conversations. But it is not always easy to identify those students. And I think that for many of you, I think the first step is to understand that there are safe spaces for which you can initiate conversations with your faculty member and with yourselves to feel not only symbolically belonging to the place here, to take ownership of the college, but also to pragmatically know that this is your space, that you can make it yours in ways that you're entitled to as the institution will have to live with. And I think that's something that's really important to think about. Yeah. Screen. You can screen.
I think a few, if not all of you, kind of alluded to the fact that being a student at CFC or at Pomona College or in higher education kind of complicated your family life. So I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more about the disconnect between your home life and your school life that occurred as a result of socialization that you encountered in college.
I have experience. So my entrance to Berkeley as a graduate student was the first time that I believe I encountered middle class people. I mean, middle class is people who make $50,000 a year. Because I grew up in the housing project, so all of my friends, even now, my friends from high school, work in service sector. They grew up with parents who were working minimum wages. And so what I did as part of my silly assimilationalist paradigm in graduate school was to try to learn things like classical music, or to learn how to really enjoy opera. because I thought that was the way you fit in. This is what educated people do. Like you get a PhD, you get educated, you're supposed to go to the theater on Saturday, and you're supposed to buy tickets to go see the opera in New York City once in a while. And I think that I spent about 3 to 4 years really committed to doing these kinds of things. And what I really realized, two things I realized after 3 years of doing this was that I really don't enjoy that crap. And it was really hard for me to admit this because in some ways, somehow when I admitted it or faced it to myself that I didn't enjoy that crap, that somehow it was testimony to the fact that I can't become a middle class person. that I can't be that educated person who can enjoy opera and talk about it. So for the longest time, my feelings to my family were that I needed to be kind of educate them about these things, because if they knew it too, then we can all talk about it. And turn on classical music on Sunday in our trailer where my family lives now, which is so crazy because what I learned, of course, as a graduate student was that that was the appropriate thing to do. And I think mostly because when I went to graduate school, I was the only person from a public university admitted to my program. And my two best friends in graduate school, one went to Harvard and one went to Swarthmore. And prior to that, I had never met anybody who went to private school. So then those were the things they did. And so for the longest time, I was so much socialized and felt that it was the way to be validated as a person, to become what I thought was the proper thing to become if you were to become middle class. And it took me a while to figure out that I didn't have to do that. And it was okay. Everyone is fine. Listen to opera.
The opera lovers, did we offend all the opera lovers? Sorry. I need to echo a little bit of what Professor Tai said, but for me, it was actually, I was very fortunate. So my mother remarried when I was a junior at Pomona, which meant I lost all my financial aid my senior year, but that's a whole other story. But I was really fortunate because I did that differently. It wasn't graduate school. My first job was in New York City, and I mean, you're in New York City, right? And I was in banking. I mean, let's talk about a culture that hasn't changed still. I mean, okay, so I only dress well when I have to meet with investment bankers, okay? Because that's just what you do if you meet with bankers. But so I did the same thing, although it was New York City Ballet, not the opera, and it was other stuff.
Even worse.
Yeah, it was ballet. I was really resonating because I thought that was exactly what I did in New York. But the great thing was that I would come home to California, and I want you to know, some of you may think Pomona is not known now. When I went to New York, not only was Pomona not known, but if they knew anything, it was always, oh, isn't there that Cal Poly? Isn't that kind of where it is? And before there were laws against this, I actually got asked, well, you're from California, are you sure you can actually work a 40-hour week? It was a serious question. Another question was, well, you're from Southern California, so do you think you can survive the New York winter? At which point I pointed out I lived in Alaska for a year. But I went home to California, and I think the lesson for me was that my family really grounded me. When I came home to California, I could be in my safe space. I could be with people that loved me for who I was, and I could be myself. And myself was growing and changing. I was just out of college. I was living on the East Coast. I was living in this, high finance culture where everybody went to either Ivy League or the Seven Sisters, and they all had parents that were on boards of directors of major corporations. That was how you got into banking then. And so I could actually breathe. And it was really where I learned, I didn't have to educate them. I didn't have to show them what it meant to be, quote unquote, middle class. I had to learn from them what it meant to be grounded. And I had to take that experience back with me to New York. And I had to be my own person. And it was really in my 5 years of New York, that I evolved to really not being afraid of who I was. And I actually, kind of turned that into an advantage because it differentiated me. Because I wasn't from one of the families where the parents were on the boards of directors and went to the Ivy League and the Seven Sisters. I was this kid from California who was smart and he could do numbers and could, do stuff and who, used kind of weird language because I was from California, but didn't know how to surf. And it actually kind of helped me not only ground myself, but also actually, ironically, helped me cut a path in corporate America because I was different. But my lesson was really about, don't change the things that are there for you, which is your family and your culture and the things that are really important to you. That's what we've carried with us our entire lives. And if we try to make that something that it's not, then it's really not going to be good.
I'd say it was a little bit of a challenge to sort of carry your family with you. even though my family was sort of familiar about college, everybody was going to college, no one had gone to a residential college yet, no one gone to liberal arts, no one knew what it was like to be a student in this kind of context. So, you change a lot quickly in a short amount of time, and you think that it's really them who change, and it causes its own kind of conflict. So I think working through that was maybe, if there was anything that's a family challenge, but just sort of translating what this experience was like to my family, being able to explain to them kind of what I was doing and you have those moments where you think you're not going to be okay, or you're not going to, survive a certain class or something. If you say that, they're like, oh, you'll always pull it out. This one I might not. They understand. You can't get them around on that. And I think in the big scheme of things, that was all good.
I'm mulling over this because I'm of two minds. So I did experience the sort of separation of family in the sense that I think for about half of my life, family here, family in DR, just thought I was vaga. They were like, what are you doing? You're always reading books. So they call me bookworm. That was my nickname, which is fine. It's okay. I'll be like, oh, it's fine. It's all good. I was a bookworm. I always had a book in my hands. When I got bored, I read. So it didn't cause attention though, because I said, yeah, I'm still studying. Yes, I'm still working. Yes, I'm working my dissertation. Yes, and I was doing that for a long time. It was like 12 years, right? 4 years of undergrad, 8 years working on a PhD. So I was that for a very long time. So if anything, just having to translate what I was doing and what graduate school was when I got to that point, that was constant. But then I realized that I had been doing that kind of translation for a while, because remember, I went to private schools. No, other people in my extended family did not attend private schools, so already I was being molded in a different way, right? The expectations were different for me. And I have to say, I give my parents credit because, one also, and maybe this is probably one of the benefits of growing up in a family with paycheck to paycheck, is that it became my mother always told me that her goal for me in life was not about happiness. It was that I could take care of myself, right, and be my own person, and be self-sufficient, and not saying be completely independent, so I was never interdependent, right? But she told me this specifically, I don't ever want you to depend on any man. Never. Right? And she told me that specifically like almost every day. And so I understood that happiness wasn't her goal for me. It's not that she didn't want me to be a happy person. You understand the difference? I had something to do, which was get myself into a position where I could take care of myself, right? And so I think that value that she shared with me growing up, wherever kind of the conflict, the distance, the reminder was, I'm doing this because I'm supposed to be able to take care of myself. That always came back, the message, always came back to me. And so in some ways, they had, in other ways, they had prepared me for, this is your trajectory. And in that way, that's one element of their parenting that I really appreciate. That they had an understanding. It seems to me that they knew that I was going to be different from them, and that was absolutely okay. Because what that meant was, I could take care of myself. So whatever had to happen to achieve that, they were comfortable with. Did it hurt? Absolutely. Was it painful that when I went away from home? Absolutely. Was it hard to have distance between us? Absolutely. All of those things were very, very difficult, but the horizon was there and the goal was set. So whatever we needed to do to get there. And when I was at Pomona, as long as I was able to come home and change the VCR, we were all good. My mother never learned to set a timer on the VCR. Oh, you don't know what that is? Video cassette recorder, right? And she always liked to tape her soap operas, so I always had to go home and do that for her. And again, so as long as I was there for those particular needs, we were all.
Can I just add, I think that this question of the family, and in particular hearing about April May's experience, I think must be elaborated upon to kind of not simply think of our families of origin as always a harmonious kind of pathway for us as we move away from our class origin and our family of origin, and that sometimes you will experience, as in my case, sort of what I would call the injuries of class. So I'll give you an example of this. This is particularly true, I think, when you experience mobility that is very tangible and that brings you even more economic and social distance to your family. So, for example, when I received tenure as a professor here about 7 years ago, I wanted my family to come out in California and come to the big party that my friends were throwing for me. And so I called home, and my family, each one of them, they were so puzzled at the fact that I wanted to fly them out to celebrate my promotion at work. So they said, we're not paying $400 to just celebrate with your promotion at work. Which for me is, I mean, as some of you know, it's not just about promotion, it's really about sort of a life-changing experience to get tenure as a professor at an elite place like Pomona College, or at least in my view. So it took me a while to really think that this isn't really a big thing for them, and that's okay because they don't have a context for understanding things like achievement, things like aspirations, things like mobility, things that we think as we move upwardly are validating to us. That in fact for them is not a status-seeking thing for them. And I think that we can't ignore the fact that many of us will experience these injuries of class where there may be that innocence or that distance from your family where they simply just either don't understand or really don't care about your mobility, which you want to celebrate with your friends. So you have to find people who are similar to you who can understand them.
So I think we're going to take one more question, and then also if you guys want to keep going with the discussion, Quest is holding a snack after this in the lobby outside. So they have really good food from Trader Joe's, so I would definitely check it out. So, yeah.
I just want to say thank you again for all of your response today. So my question is a little bit more overarching as like what the social minority looks like, the socialized minority looks like. And I noticed a theme when you guys were, your experience is that it was either because you were non-white or you were economically challenged that you had to be socially socialized and you were considered a socialized minority. So my question is, are people like me and us, like economically challenged and non-white, always going to be the socialized minority in elite institutions like Pomona? So like, in other words, are systemic racism and systemic classism necessary conditions for us to enjoy this privilege and this elite education? And if so, what can Pomona do to change that, if anything? And does it want to change that, right? Like, or is it ingrained, is it inevitable for us to be that socialized minority here forever and always?
Everything changes, right? This place changes, generations change, society changes. So I think that when I was an undergrad, in my sophomore year, spring of my sophomore year, I took a class called Psychology of the Chicano with Ray Buddha. It was the first time that I ever had a non-white professor in my life. I only had that one other time in my entire time at the Claremont Colleges. Only twice would I have a non-white professor. And that class was also the first time that I remember ever being in a classroom that was dominated by Chicano Latino students. It wasn't a white-dominated classroom. That was a profoundly rare experience for my Claremont time. And I don't even have the words to type how important that was to me as an individual and to my survival, right? There's this man up in the front of the room who sounds like my dad, who sounds like my tios, who completely, for that semester, even though it was like at 9:35 and I had a problem waking up in the morning, so I was always sorry. But how important that was to me, sort of finding a way of really, so what I went through there is kind of what I try to do in my own classes, right? To be able to have an experience where you're not the odd man out, or you're not also saddled with the burden of having to represent the Latino view on something, the Chicano view on something. Right? That was our classroom, and our experience was the topic of study, and it was what was normalized, and that experience was big. And I think that Ray is now part of a much larger choir at this place, and hopefully one that grows even more. I think that my sense of the community of color while I was a student here is that it could probably fit at the 5 colleges, fit inside of this one room, right? And this is just some of you at this one college, right? I mean, that demography changes at that level as well. So I mean, you're being the minority is always a shifting. There's a shifting context to it, both domestically here, locally, as well as the larger one.
I just put a statistic out there to go on the website. It caught my attention. For the first time, at least in the 5 years I've been here, we actually did a press release about the admitted class, and I don't know how many of you saw it. 46.5% of admitted students are students of color. I don't know how many are going to actually come, but 46.5% of the roughly 900 letters that went out to the class of 2018 was 46.5%. So I think that means a lot. Yeah, no.
Okay, so call art.
Underrepresented.
That's what it says. I mean, I caught my attention now. Maybe.
I saw that too, but I always think that's I have doubts.
It's supposed to be accurate. So. But I mean, it did catch my attention because I thought that was really notable. I mean, I think it, and even if not all of them come, I'm just saying that what is happening, I think, is that someone asked, what is the college doing? I think the college is being very intentional about wanting a community where everyone feels that they see people like them and they hear voices like theirs, and that all of those communities are well represented. We're not there yet. There's a lot more to do. I think it's probably a little harder in faculty of getting there sooner because you only hire 1 or 2 people a year, and numbers have to equalize. But I think the institution is, whoever the institution is, whoever the people are in the institution, are committed to that. I can tell you, I don't think I'm breaking any confidences. I can tell you that it's discussed a lot at executive staff meetings. So it's not a side issue that's sort of over on the side. There's a real commitment to this institution trying to be a leader and not a follower. We may not be there yet. We may have a ways to go, but the commitment is there.
I don't know if this will answer your question, but I want to go back to the first part of the question, which is, I think you asked the question, are people like us always cultural and socioeconomic minorities? And I think that in my vision, someday, we will replace the current faculty with people of color, and all the cleaners and janitors are non-people of color. I don't think that's going to happen. But what I think we should strive for students, and think that you all are in such a privileged situation to be at this kind of place where you can make huge impact And I'll give you an example of this. I taught, Pomona was my first job. Then I got recruited to teach at a public school, UC Santa Barbara, for 4 years. And then they asked me to come back. And the moment I realized why it was important for me to be at Pomona College was because I realized that representation at a place like Pomona College for faculty like me is extremely important, where now there's already representation at a place like UC Santa Barbara. So like, for example, I'm the only Vietnamese American professor at a liberal arts college in the country. It's kind of crazy when you think about that, because there's a huge immigrant population of Vietnamese Americans. But I think my second point is that because we're in such a privileged situation, and what I'm about to say might sound kind of controversial, is that I think many students here forget that power operates in many levels, and that ultimately, however, the more power you can hold, the more difference you can make in whatever it is that you do. So whatever it is that you decide to do with your life, whether you decide to go to nonprofit or medicine or law, shoot for the moon. Get the best credential that you can. Go to the best place and be that person in power. Be that president at a liberal arts college or an Ivy League, and create the institutional changes with your name behind it. And I think that's where many of us can think about how we can transform the positionalities of how we are placed within this hierarchical structure. And I think that with a Pomona degree, you are well on the way to have that pedigree to be in those positions of power. And I think many of our students who are cultural, socioeconomic minorities forget that. We forget that this pedigree is a cachet that you have to cash in at some point, and that you really can cash it in. But in order to do that, you need to understand, as I said earlier, the process of how things operate, and you need to understand how procedures are governed. And to do that, you need to find out from people how to do those things. If you want to be a president of a university, find out how to get there. Find out the exact steps that it will take for you to become a president of a university, so that you can hire all faculty of color. And only white people to clean your dorms. So there are ways in which you can institutionally make this, but you need to be in a position of power to do that. And I think that on some levels as faculty members, we make those changes on the levels that we can as faculty members, and we all have, I think, more to do and more changes to make. And I think that you cannot forget that you're part of those agents of change.
Yeah, and Hong absolutely practices what he preaches, because when I got my job offer at Pomona, I think you were one of maybe the second person I called. And he said, okay, honey, this is what you need to do. What you need to negotiate for, ask for money, because you will need both retail and mental health therapy. You know. And I said, okay, honey.
I said, here's the key to my house.
And here's the key to my house, just do all this stuff. So he's absolutely there. I'm just gonna say incoherent things right now. One, I am also happy to say that my gardener is a white guy. Who drives us. Southern California, and I have a white guy gardener, right? So that's a reversal I enjoy. My random things, and answer your question specifically. Again, this is a particular kind of bubble, right? I just came back from Ostos Community College in New York in the South Bronx. That's the executive administration of that college is 25% Latino. The president of the college is Boricua, Puerto Rican, historian, scholar, Felix Matos. The provost is a Puerto Rican woman. I mean, it's a Hispanic serving institution, South Bronx, New York. Of course, it will be that way, but they've also transformed the institution at the level of leadership, at a level that I had never seen before. And it makes such a difference to be in that kind of majority space. There, we weren't the socialized minority. We were the majority socializing the institution, right? And Ostos is an institution that also comes out of struggle for Puerto Ricans to have access to higher education in New York. And so it was born, in the early 70s and named after, a very important Puerto Rican philosopher and independence leader, activist, Eugenio Maria de Ostos. So it has that activist legacy attached to it. attached to the community. So there are institutions that look like us out there, right? Now the ways in which those administrators have to negotiate other kinds of power hierarchies and struggles within their CUNY system, the City University of New York, that's a different set of questions. But we have representation at particular institutions, HBCUs, right? Similar kind of story. And I think one of the most impressive or transformative moments was when Janetta Cole came when I was a student here, and at that time, was she yet president of Spelman? Oh, she was. She was president, had just been named president of Spelman, and she electrified everybody with her talk. She had us all signing up to go to Spelman that next semester, for exchange, or trying to figure out what that experience was going to be like. But seeing her take that power, I admire people who colonize space. For all of my critique of colonialism, and white settler colonialism in particular, but she just dominated the room. She was, just so, and that's an example of what Hung is talking about, is realizing I've got skills, I have capacities, this is the moment, marching right in there and taking it. And she did incredible things at Spelman, and she electrified us as an audience. So that's said. I worry, however, if we're all necessarily committed to that multiracial democracy. Just because you're brown doesn't mean you're necessarily down. Right? And so, what I think I worry. I just have points of worry. I worry about my African American students. I worry that where do they have a sense of critical mass and belonging and community in the same way that Latinos do? How are my Black and browns getting along in a context where there's a lot of Black and brown tension? And I see those tensions in our dining hall. We have issues going on in our staff that exemplify the Black and brown tensions of our communities. These are serious issues. So are we achieving the goal towards this kind of, mobility toward whiteness that moves us away from the multiracial democracy? That's not a mobility I'm interested in, right? I'm interested in something that keeps us responsible and responsive to each other. And sometimes I think, there's a forgetfulness there about the historical legacies and the moral, and now the movie about Cesar Chavez is out, and I think that makes us think about that history and those connections, and the United Farm Workers with the Filipino farm workers, like those stories we don't talk about, that don't get talked about often enough, but do in the master's class clearly, you see all over this, and in my classes and in Hung's class, I mean, they're getting talked about, but I also worry that sometimes we may not be paying attention enough to each other, and we just have to keep an eye on that.
So thank you guys. Thank you guys for having those amazing questions. And thank you to the speakers again for coming out here.
And someone else that we forgot to mention that was also very integral in planning this is also Gervais Marsh, who is abroad right now, but helped definitely first semester in putting this together.
Where's my coffee?
Yes, Gervais left me some coffee, so that's fine.
And again, if you guys want to keep on with the conversation, Quest is holding a snack right outside of Rose Hills. Thank you guys again for coming.
The camera.